All right, Stacy and Sarah, I'm super excited to welcome you to the Rule Breaker Studio today. And I'm so excited to hear your story, hear about your business and adventures, because I know you all have many. So, without further ado, I'd love to just jump into the conversation and let you all share a little bit about yourselves and your story.
Okay.
Well,
I'm
I'm Sarah.
I'm Stacy. So we should start out with the fact, because everybody won't know this, that we are
Mhm.
twins, like actual real
Actual
twins.
real life twins.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and our nursing story started, I think, pretty unconventionally. We actually went into the operating room. We were surgical techs, and then we once we were there, we had this realization of like, oh, nurses can do something else than, the narrative that we had always thought.
Yeah, being
Um,
at the bedside, we're like, oh, they can do this too.
yeah, so that's what
Yeah.
really got us like into nursing. And I think that there's something about being in the OR that we always felt a little bit like different, than maybe traditional or like, nurses in many other specialties. But I think, something that I've reflected on a lot lately, and, I know Sarah feels the same, is that like in that journey, when you work in the OR, you do have this like dynamic with the patient, but you're mostly having your communication with the team.
Yeah,
And
we kind of
we're
joke that like the OR nursing is like the most non-direct direct patient care job you can have because like even though yes, you like do talk to the patient a little bit, it's like really the main focus of the nurses at the OR is like taking care of the surgical team to take care of the patient.
and the other piece of that is like we also like worked in a place that was huge on teaching.
Mhm.
So we discovered like very early on that we like loved the precepting, the mentoring. And what we didn't realize is that like, hey, there's a whole skill set and a talent and like something about this for people that like to do that. It's not just, oh, you like to teach,
Mhm.
so I feel like years later when we ended up finding out about the nurse coaching specialty, it was like very natural, because even though we didn't know what we were getting ourselves into, it was like, oh, like we've sort of been doing this thing called coaching all along, and now we have like a ton more tools.
Mhm.
So I think that that's like something that connects our whole journey really well. But the other thing that, like, I don't know, kind of like is a, what do they call that? Like a little, like a thread, a through line,
Mhm. Yeah.
is like before we knew anything about mindset work or personal development, we always had this relationship with travel,
Mhm.
that, as you mentioned, adventures,
Yeah.
that was like our first and biggest teacher of things can look different than they do right now. Like
Yeah.
you go somewhere else, you explore another country, it turns out that everybody else doesn't work as a surgical nurse for a living. So guess what? There
Yeah.
are other other
Yeah,
things
there's
that you
other
can
jobs
do.
out there. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we'd meet
um,
people. We'd like meet people. Sometimes we'd actually meet people like on a trip, or like a couple times too, we'd be like watching a travel show, and it's like you meet these people and they're like, yeah, I just came here and I never left. And we're like, what do you mean you just like came here and never left? Like you can just what do you mean you just quit your job and you just picked up your life and now you just like live here? Like that's a thing, you know?
so yeah, I think we've been fascinated by this idea of like personal reinvention
Hmm.
for a really long time.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've said a couple things that I want to circle back to if you're
Yeah.
okay with that.
Of
Yeah.
So,
course.
number one, academic medical centers. I think so. I came from an academic medical center myself. So I'm from Kentucky originally, and I
Hmm.
went to school at the University of Kentucky. I worked at the University of Kentucky. And so you kind of get raised in that academic medical center mindset. And I think there is something to kind of say about that work and working in those environments, because it does give you a different perspective, right? Like people
Yeah.
come to,
Hmm.
they come to a location to really further their education and further their understanding, and then they move on to other things. And so it really gives you that like empowerment and that knowledge that, okay, like I can learn here and then I can grow and I can grow somewhere else and I can grow somewhere else. And it kind of gives you that connection of change is okay and it's a challenge, but like you're able to see people come and go through that often. So I do think there's like a mindset to that academic medical center culture. Yeah. And I think you all drew on a really great piece of that culture, which is the connection to education and mentorship and coaching, though that term really hasn't been used like widely throughout, especially throughout the field of nursing, right? Like I've spent the last 6 years in leadership, and we just really started trying to reframe that conversation, right? Instead of giving feedback, it's okay, let's coach you up. Let's like have a different mindset around that. So I'd love to explore a little bit more about kind of what you all have found through your journey. I do know that you all are nurse coaches. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you found through that journey in changing that and reframing that mindset.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Do you want to start?
I know. I'm like, we're actually, that's the thing is like, it's like, where do you even start? Because I feel like since finding like nurse coaching and like going through the process, and obviously like, well, maybe not obviously, but okay. So when you go through the nurse coaching, like curriculum, and you're like learning how to be a coach and you're like practicing, at least in our experience, like you are also having the experience of being coached. So it's like, yes, you have the experience of coaching others, but then you are also being coached yourself. And then, so you get that experience of having it firsthand, like both ways. But then also like you continue to grow as you're like helping other people with things. And it's like, I look at it's interesting to like look back and be like where I was before I found coaching versus like where I am now after like, I think it's 3 years since we like got certified. Yeah. Got certified. And it's like from that time until now, and it's like we started a business. We now have both been out of the hospital. I just took my personal sabbatical in New Zealand for 5 months. Like I never would have thought that doing anything like that would have been possible, like without going through the whole process and like doing the work on my mindset and like seeing that there is like all this possibility out there. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure there's more, but that's where my sentence ends.
Let me know,
Stacy.
Should I jump in or should we pause? Okay. Because I'm like, that was a nice like sum up. Something that we were talking about is that, these days I feel like the term coaching, it gets thrown around a lot anytime you're essentially like doing something with somebody one-on-one. But when we think about like the nursing specialty, because a lot of nurses still don't know that there is this nursing specialty called nurse coaching. And so when we first, found out about this, like I kind of think of nurse coaching as like the therapeutic communication that we learned in nursing school, but on steroids. But like in nursing school, all we learned was like, you can't agree, you can't disagree, you can't say yes, you can't say no. And we're like, what's left? Like what can you I say? Feel like it's so muddy when you're learning that piece. But then all of a sudden you find out like, I think the biggest mindset shift when you are looking at things from a coaching perspective is basically like, this idea that person in front of you who you are coaching is the expert on, their own life, their circumstances, their goals, their vision, this just has so many applications like in healthcare, and especially like coming from the perspective of surgery. It's like, what do you mean they're the expert? Like they're coming to us because we're the experts, but it's like, whoa. But like when you're talking about somebody wanting to like make a change in their life, have a transformation, do like career change, like big life goals, work-life balance, whatever. Like we have these different areas that you can think about, but it's like, you really have to like reevaluate how you look at yourself when you're connecting with that person. Because I think, a really common theme, the more conversations we have with people, especially women, a lot of nurses, is that, there is this inner knowing that we just when we're in the survival mode of our jobs, we stuff it down, or like we might, like give credit to something else, or like we don't want to use the word intuition because people might not understand that. So like there is this inner knowing that over the years of maybe working in the healthcare environment, we have a complicated relationship with. But when it comes to like really having work-life balance, or being aligned in your job, or doing something that really like brings you joy, or feels like it's the right thing for you to do, it's like this will always come back up. And truly, like a lot of the time we know what we want, we're just really afraid to go for it, like whether it's other people's expectations, like just fears, doubts, like our own inner critic, and we really outsource like so much of our decision making. So I think like the biggest thing about coaching is really realizing like that potential that's inside every person, and that like when you are really in alignment with what you're doing, you can be unstoppable. But like if you live in a world where you're only doing what everybody else thinks you should be doing, then everything feels impossible.
Okay. I appreciate the summation of kind of what nurse coaching is for you and that coaching mindset. I'd love to hear a little bit about, so Sarah, you shared that you took a sabbatical and you both have transitioned, left, you're not in hospital roles, but you're still nurses, you're still supporting nurses and all those things. So I'd love to explore a little bit about what that looks like, how you even come to that kind of decision, right? I've met a few leaders lately who took some time off, just because you have to recover sometimes from these roles.
Yeah, and pro that. Yeah, we're very like, yes. Yeah.
And I think that's not something that we think about doing. So I'd love to hear, maybe even an example of like when you all are talking with someone who maybe that's at the point where they're trying to decide like, how do we make this happen? I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say I think everybody should take a sabbatical.
Well, I think we need to normalize that in the nursing field.
I do think we need to normalize it. And the thing is, when you look at and this is something else that like we learned a lot through traveling, is like you meet people in like Australia and the UK and like wherever, and like it's so normalized there that you can take these extended periods of time off from your job, from from whatever. So we're like, what do you mean you can just like tell your boss you need like a mental leave and you can just leave for 3 months? Like that would never happen in the US, right? So like that's just not a thing here, you get like
wait, they actually have something called stress leave in Australia, by the way.
It was stress leave. Yeah. Like our friend was telling us that, like, this girl's on a stress leave for 3 months. And I'm like, can I be on a stress leave for 3 months? Like,
can you sign me up for that?
Exactly. Yes. Sign me up, but yeah, like, and for me personally, like making that decision, like, I won't go into like too much detail. I'll just say, like, long story short, I'm like a huge Lord of the Rings fan. So like I've always loved New Zealand, and that's why I wanted to go initially. And then I kind of got to the point where I knew I was like burned out again at the hospital, but it just like, and some things are making it better, but I also just got to that point where I knew like being in the hospital is not my aligned like job. Like this isn't the type of nursing that like I want to continue doing. And then I was just it was like a now or never thing. Like I think there's never a perfect time for anything, but I was like, I also kind of feel like if I don't do it now, like I don't think I ever will. And so then I was like, whatever, I'm just gonna like, just made the decision, like just gonna do it. And then obviously like it's a lot of work after to like plan something like of that magnitude and like do it. But I think kind of like the biggest thing with like coaching people and like helping them do something like that, like really it's the mindset around it. Like, because and I feel like especially in like the States, there's this like, well, if I leave, like, how do I know I'll be able to have a job when I come back, and how am I going to support myself? And, like nobody else is doing this. So like people are going to think there's something wrong with me. Like if I'm doing this. So like most of it, I think, is really not even the actual, like, okay, like how do you plan something? It's more so like you need to get the mindset to be okay and realize that like, just because it's not like normal here doesn't mean like you can't do it. and that it's not normal like other places. And also, like, who cares if it's normal or not? Like, you should just be able to do whatever you want, you know? So
I love that. That sounds like such a rule breaker thing to say. Just do whatever you want. I love that you showed up here and said that today.
Yeah, I'll sign that. I'll sign that as well.
But yeah, and I think also it's like throughout our like hospital careers, people were always like, with our traveling, they're always like, how do you get to do this? Like, are you a secret millionaire? Like, who's funding your trips? And it's like, no, we just prioritized it, you know. And like some of
and that's
these
also coming from people
were
who literally made
like there was one surgeon that asked us that. He made $1 million. You know what I mean? Like what do you mean?
You're a
How
millionaire.
can we
I'm not a
afford
millionaire.
that? You know, we really enjoyed the secret millionaire like rumor, but at the same time, it's like, you know, people looked at it like it's this thing they could never do. And the thing is that it's like you do start to feel this sense of we were kind of like, we have these like really strong passions and desires, and while we recognize that people have different situations, but ultimately, like if there's something you really want, you're going to make it happen. But in these environments, and it's not just healthcare, but it's just like the human nature, like the way that people are, it's so easy to just like be in victim mode and say you're stuck and not do anything about it, and look at somebody else doing something and think like, well, I'll never be able to do that, you know? And so I think it's just like really sad, because when we think about like people and their unlived lives, it's like, but you know, but why do you do that to yourself?
Yeah. And I think too, like another thing, like people, I think there's this kind of like misconception that like the fear needs to be gone to like do something. And it's like, no, like even though I always wanted to go to New Zealand, I always wanted to like live there, like picking up my life and moving somewhere for 5 months, and also only having 2 of the 5 months planned before I went. Like, I didn't go there with no fear. Like, I was afraid. Like, yeah, I was excited too, but there was still a lot of fear with all of it. But like, it's like that quote, like, you got to feel the fear, but like do it anyways. And I think like that's another thing with coaching is like, you know, we're not necessarily actually here to help you get rid of that fear, but like you don't like, but to like work through it and to see that like you can still do things afraid, and like maybe eventually that fear will go away, but like it doesn't need to be completely gone before you like start taking action.
Okay, so a couple of things that I just want to highlight that you all said that's utter gold. So one, I think people do need to be okay with doing things afraid, right? Like I completely agree. I also think, Stacy, you said something about, sorry, I'm going to misquote this, I'm sure.
It's okay.
But you were talking about how like when you need to normalize this like time off, like normalize like taking time off, and people will prioritize. When you prioritize, you will make it happen. And so I think those two things, like saying those two things and hearing you all say those two things, and knowing that you all have worked with many people and trying to make these, you know, make decisions, realign themselves with their goals and that kind of thing. I do think it's very pivotal to think like, yes, you're going to be afraid. No, the fear is not going to go away. And sometimes you just have to set the goal and put it at the top of the list so that you can work toward attaining it. And it doesn't mean that you're going to set the goal and tomorrow it's going to be yours. Like, it takes work over time, which we all know. I mean, you all didn't get where you are in the coaching business like yesterday. You know what I mean? So it's an evolutionary process, but I do think like people need to hear those things. Like, these things happen and we're able to, you know, there's things that you're going to have to work through along the way. But if you want the journey bad enough and you want it enough, you will figure out ways that you can incorporate it into your life. So I really appreciate that. So just to kind of get us to the next step, you guys did come on the Rule Breakers. So I do have to hear from you guys as far as if you're breaking any rule in healthcare, which I did hear you all break lots of rules. In your conversation on the show today, I heard lots of rules that you guys have broken. So I love that. And I knew you all would be perfect guests because of that. But I'd love to hear if you're breaking any rule in healthcare, what rule are you guys breaking? And you can answer the question separately if you'd like.
Okay. Yeah. So we were thinking about this before the show. And, I think that the biggest like unwritten rule that needs to be broken is that being a good nurse means this like complete self-sacrifice, which is actually self-abandonment. um, because like when we do that, we really like, and this is a huge like topic of our coaching conversations, is people lose touch with how much power they can take back to set boundaries, to like say no to overtime, to have that, to attain that work life balance, that a lot of times you're just in kind of this like prison of other people's expectations. And so I mean, yeah, I feel like it's on both sides. Like sometimes those expectations, and like that culture is really strong. So like we need to stop doing that to people, number one. But like number two, realize that like when you change that relationship with yourself and that inner voice, because a lot of times that's all it is. And then, you find out, and this is the case with so many of our clients, like one in particular who was not taking time off because she was afraid that the doctors on her team would think that she wasn't like a hard worker. She was a director, and in our time working together, she ended up taking more PTO than she ever had. And I like, that's like my pride. Like I tell her story over and over again because I'm so proud of that like metric. But it's the fact is that we have these two dynamics, but we can very much assume other people's expectations, and we can still be wrong. So it's like there is a lot more room than you think to take your life back, even in nursing, even in leadership, and like especially as a woman, there's so much room to like take your life back.
Yeah. And I think like along those same lines is that it goes back to like the identity piece. And like,
Yes.
just because you're a nurse doesn't mean that your whole identity should be that you're a nurse. Like actually, like your identity as a nurse should be like lowest on the totem pole. Like there's so many like, and like for me personally too, like I don't know if I necessarily struggled with like, well, who am I if I'm not at the bedside? But it's like let but I did let that overtake some of my other passions that are so much stronger. And one of the things that helped me so much like deal with like my burnout and like stresses was like reconnecting with all the other pieces of my identity that I had kind of like lost to nursing. So I think like I think like the big thing is like, just because you're a nurse doesn't mean like that's all you are. And we were actually talking this the other day. We were trying to think of like a journal prompt, like you're a diamond and you have many facets, and like nursing is one of those facets, but like it is not the main facet. Like you have so many other things that like make up who you are, and like just because you're a nurse and that's your job doesn't mean that that's like the entire piece.
Okay, you guys are dropping literal gold over here. More than the Olympics. So, I know this will resonate with so many people. With that being said, I would love if someone's interested in catching up with either of you, learning more about your coaching, learning more about your services, maybe following you to see where you're at, if you're off on more New Zealand adventures or you're doing fun in France. I'd love for you to share where people can connect with you. Where do you hang out the most in this digital age? So.
Yeah. Well, we have several Instagram accounts, but we do have our main one together is Sarah and Stacy. We also have a website, livewellandwhole.com, and on either of those places we have links that you can connect with us
and LinkedIn.
And LinkedIn,
and we have our separate LinkedIn accounts, so Sarah Prej and Stacy, but I think my full name is on there, Anastasia, which I don't actually use that much, but I think both of my names are there. Side note. So,
Okay, and I will put links to where people can connect with you in the show notes and on social media. So don't fret, anyone out there that's listening. just go to the show notes and you can find them there. Again, I want to thank you all so much for coming and sharing your rule breaker stories. I love your rule breaker spirit, even though I'm sure a lot of people, they say that, they're like, I say that and they're like, I just never thought of myself as a rule breaker. I'm like, I know, no, until we realize
we
like,
love
how
it.
many barriers, you know, that we've actually broke down, and like how many lives you guys have changed. I'm so impressed. So thank you so much.
And thank you for having us. We love the concept and, you know, getting passionate about breaking rules and,
Sweet
for
little
the
me breaking rules.
Yeah, you know, for the better of nurses and healthcare and women.
Of course. Well, thank you again.
Yeah.
Thank you.